Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon watching the stars through the main screen. His ship was 3 months into a deep space exploration mission beyond the outer edge of human territory. The 43 crew members had been mapping new star systems and looking for signs of intelligent life. So far they had found nothing but empty planets and dead rocks floating in space. Amy Collins sat at her station monitoring long-range sensors. She was the ship's best science officer and had been hoping to make first contact with an alien species during this mission. Her equipment suddenly picked up something strange. A signal was coming from a nearby system that did not match any natural phenomenon she had ever seen. "Captain Morrison, I am getting something unusual on the sensors," Amy said, turning to face Jake. "There is some kind of distress signal coming from the 4th planet in the next system. The pattern looks artificial, but I cannot identify the source." Jake moved closer to her station and looked at the data scrolling across her screen. The signal was definitely not natural. It repeated every 30 seconds in a complex pattern that suggested intelligence behind it. This could be what they had been searching for during their long journey. "Set course for that system," Jake ordered his pilot Danny Rodriguez. "But keep our weapons ready and shields up. We do not know what we might find there." The USS Horizon jumped to faster than light speed and arrived at the edge of the system within hours. What they found there made everyone on the bridge stop and stare. A massive alien ship was drifting near the 4th planet. It was easily 10 times larger than their own vessel and covered in strange markings that glowed with purple light. "My God, it is beautiful," Amy whispered as she ran every scan she could think of. "The technology is far beyond anything we have ever seen. The hull appears to be made from some kind of living metal that repairs itself. The energy readings are off the charts." Jake felt excitement and fear at the same time. This was humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, but the size of that ship made him nervous. If these beings were hostile, his small exploration vessel would not stand much of a chance in a fight. "Open a channel and broadcast our standard first contact message," Jake told his communications officer Lisa Bennett. "Let them know we come in peace and want to help with whatever emergency they are having." Lisa sent the message in multiple languages and mathematical formulas that any intelligent species should be able to understand. They waited for several minutes but received no response. The alien ship continued to drift silently as if it was completely dead. "Maybe their communications are damaged," Amy suggested. "The distress signal is still broadcasting, so someone or something is alive over there. Should we try to get closer?" Before Jake could answer, the alien ship suddenly came to life. Bright lights appeared along its hull and the purple markings began pulsing faster. Then, without any warning, it fired some kind of energy beam that struck the USS Horizon's shields with tremendous force. "Shields down to 60%, Danny called out, as the ship shook from the impact. "That was not a warning shot, Captain. They are trying to disable us." Jake grabbed his chair as another beam hit them even harder. These aliens were not interested in peaceful contact. They had been waiting for his ship to get close enough to attack. The distress signal had been a trap designed to lure in anyone who might try to help. "Return fire and get us out of here," Jake shouted over the noise of alarms. "All power to engines and jump us back to human space." But it was already too late. The alien ship fired again, and this time their beam went right through the USS Horizon's shields like they were not even there. The energy surge knocked out their main engines and weapons in one shot. Emergency power kicked in, but they were now helpless against their attacker. "Hull breach on Deck 3, came a voice over the comm system. "We are losing atmosphere fast." More alien ships appeared around them as if they had been hiding behind the planet. Jake realized they had flown straight into an ambush. These beings had technology that made human weapons look like ancient swords against modern rifles. The largest alien ship moved closer, and Jake could see strange symbols appearing on its hull. Then a voice came over their speakers speaking perfect English, which somehow made the situation even more frightening. "Primitive creatures of the small vessel, you are now prisoners of the Zephyrian Empire. Do not resist and you will not be harmed. Your species will make excellent servants once you are properly trained. Jake felt anger building in his chest. Servants. These aliens looked at humans like they were animals to be captured and trained. He had spent his whole life exploring space and dreaming of meeting other intelligent life. This was not how first contact was supposed to happen. The alien ships surrounded the USS Horizon completely. Jake could see strange docking tubes extending toward his ship. Soon aliens would be boarding, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. His small crew would be prisoners on an alien world far from home with no hope of rescue. But Jake Morrison was not the kind of man who gave up easily. As he watched the aliens prepare to board his ship, he was already thinking about ways to escape. These Zephyrians might have better technology, but they had never met a human before. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Jake Morrison woke up in a small gray cell with walls that seemed to be made of the same living metal as the alien ships. He had been unconscious for what felt like hours after the Zephyrians had boarded his vessel and captured his entire crew. His head still hurt from whatever weapon they had used to knock him out. The cell had no windows and only one door that had no visible handle or lock. A dim purple light came from somewhere in the ceiling, but Jake could not see any source for it. The air smelled strange and felt thicker than what he was used to breathing on human ships. A small slot in the wall opened, and some kind of food paste was pushed through on a metal tray. Jake looked at the gray substance and decided he was not hungry enough to eat alien food just yet. Instead, he began examining every inch of his cell, looking for any weakness he could use to escape. The walls felt warm to the touch, and seemed to pulse slightly like they were alive. When Jake pressed hard against one section, it gave way a little bit before pushing back. This living metal technology was unlike anything humans had ever developed, but it might have weaknesses that the Zephyrians did not know about. After several hours, the door to his cell simply melted away. 3 tall alien figures walked in wearing what looked like armor made from the same purple glowing material as their ships. The Zephyrians were humanoid, but much taller than humans, with pale blue skin and large black eyes that showed no emotion. "Human creature, you will come with us now," the middle alien said in perfect English. "Commander Vexstar wishes to examine your species before deciding what work you will be assigned to perform." Jake stood up slowly and looked each alien in the eyes. They seemed surprised that he was not cowering in fear like they expected. Most species probably begged for mercy when captured by the mighty Zephyrian Empire, but Jake Morrison had other ideas. "Where is my crew?" Jake asked in a calm voice. "I want to see that they are safe before I go anywhere with you." The aliens looked at each other as if they could not believe what they had just heard. The middle one stepped closer to Jake and spoke in a voice that was clearly meant to intimidate him. "You are in no position to make demands, primitive creature. Your crew belongs to the Empire now just like you do. You will do as you are told or face the consequences." Jake smiled and nodded as if he understood. But inside his mind he was already working on a plan. These aliens were used to dealing with species that gave up hope once they were captured. They had no idea that humans never stopped fighting even when the situation seemed impossible. They led Jake through corridors that curved and twisted in ways that hurt his eyes to look at. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to move and change when he was not looking directly at them. Other aliens walked past without giving him a second glance, as if captured. Prisoners were a common sight. Commander Vexstar was waiting in a large room filled with strange equipment that hummed and glowed with various colors. He was even taller than the other Zephyrians and wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid light. When he spoke, his voice echoed strangely in the chamber. "So this is what a human looks like," Vexstar said as he walked around Jake, studying him like a scientist examining a new specimen. "Your species appears to be physically weak and mentally simple. Yet your vessel showed some clever engineering for such primitive creatures." Jake remained silent and kept his face neutral while the alien commander continued his inspection. He was memorizing every detail of the room and looking for anything that might be useful later. The equipment seemed to be controlled by touch, panels that glowed when the aliens got near them. Tell me, human, what is your function on the vessel we captured? Vexstar asked. Are you a leader among your kind or simply another worker? I am the captain of that ship, Jake replied. I was responsible for the safety of my crew, and I still am. Vexstar made a sound that might have been laughter. You were responsible for nothing. Your vessel was captured easily, and your crew is now property of the Empire. You have no authority here and no hope of rescue. The sooner you accept this reality, the easier your new life will be. Jake nodded again as if he was accepting his fate, but he was actually counting the number of guards in the room and noting where the exits were located. The Zephyrians seemed to think that overwhelming technology was enough to keep prisoners under control. They did not post many guards, and their security seemed focused on preventing escapes from the cells rather than from other areas. You will be assigned to work in the mining facilities on Level 7, Vexstar continued. Your species appears strong enough for manual labor even if you lack intelligence for more complex tasks. Try to prove useful, and you may survive long enough to see your homeworld when we add it to the Empire. They took Jake to a different section of the facility where he found Danny Rodriguez and Lisa Bennett along with most of his crew. They were all wearing gray uniforms and looked tired but unharmed. Jake caught Danny's eye and gave him a small nod that meant he was working on something. The mining facility was exactly what Jake had hoped to find. It was full of equipment and tools that could be modified for other purposes if someone knew what they were doing. Danny was an excellent engineer who could build almost anything from spare parts, and Lisa was good at figuring out how alien technology worked. Over the next few days, Jake began talking quietly with his crew members whenever the guards were not watching. He learned that the Zephyrians kept prisoners from 17 different alien species in the facility. Most of them had been captured years ago, and had given up all hope of ever seeing their homeworlds again, but Jake had not given up hope, and neither had his crew. They began studying their captors and learning everything they could about Zephyrian technology and security procedures. The aliens were so confident in their superiority that they barely paid attention to what their prisoners were doing as long as the work got done. Jake discovered that the living metal walls had to be fed with a special energy source or they would become brittle and weak. The security systems all relied on sensors that were designed to detect the specific biology of known alien species. And most importantly, the Zephyrians had never encountered humans before, so their systems had no idea what to look for. Danny found ways to modify mining tools into weapons while Lisa figured out how to access the facility's computer systems. Amy had been assigned to a laboratory where she learned about Zephyrian ships and how their technology worked. Piece by piece, Jake's crew gathered the information and resources they would need for an escape attempt. The plan Jake developed was simple but dangerous. They would disable the security systems, create a distraction, and fight their way to the transport ships in the docking bay. It sounded impossible, but Jake had learned something important during his time as a prisoner. The Zephyrians were so used to easy victories that they had become lazy and overconfident. They had never faced an enemy that refused to stay defeated. The escape from the Zephyrian prison facility had been even more successful than Jake Morrison had dared to hope. Not only had his crew made it out alive, but they had also freed over 200 prisoners from 17 different alien species. The hijacked transport ship they were flying was packed with former captives who could barely believe they were free, but freedom was not the same as safety. Jake knew the Zephyrians would be hunting them across the galaxy with everything they had. The transport ship was fast, but it was not built for long-distance travel or combat. They needed to find somewhere to hide and figure out their next move before the Empire caught up with them. Danny Rodriguez was working frantically in the engine room trying to modify the alien propulsion system to give them more speed. The Zephyrian technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also completely different from human engineering. Every system seemed to be controlled by biological interfaces that responded to touch and thought patterns. I think I can boost our speed by about 20%, Danny called out over the COM system. But this ship was not designed for the modifications I am making. We might lose power completely if I push too hard. Jake was studying star charts on the bridge, trying to find somewhere they could go for help. The problem was that most of this region of space was controlled by the Zephyrian Empire or species that were too afraid to oppose them. Earth was hundreds of light years away, and they would never make it that far in a stolen transport ship. Amy Collins had been talking to the other freed prisoners, trying to learn about the galaxy and what species might be willing to help them. Most of the aliens were too scared to even think about fighting back against the Empire. They just wanted to find somewhere safe to hide until the Zephyrians forgot about them, but one of the prisoners was different. Her name was Ellen Wright, and she was a human smuggler who had been captured while running supplies to rebel groups in the outer systems. Ellen had been a prisoner for only a few weeks, but she knew more about this region of space than anyone else on the ship. "There is a place we can go," Ellen told Jake as they met in the small cargo bay that had been converted into a planning room. "It is called Haven Station, and it sits right on the border between Empire space and the Free Systems. The owner is someone who does not ask questions about where people come from or what they have done." Jake liked Ellen immediately. She was tough and smart and had the kind of practical experience that his crew needed. She had been fighting the Zephyrians in small ways for years and understood how the Empire operated better than most people. "Haven Station is run by a species called the Korathi," Ellen continued. "They are traders who will deal with anyone as long as the price is right. They also have connections to resistance groups throughout this sector of the galaxy." The journey to Haven Station took 3 days, and Jake spent most of that time learning everything he could from Ellen and the other freed prisoners. He discovered that the Zephyrian Empire was much larger and more powerful than he had imagined. They controlled over 200 star systems and had been expanding for thousands of years. Most species that encountered the Zephyrians either surrendered immediately or were destroyed. The few that tried to fight back usually gave up after losing a few battles. This was why the Empire had become so overconfident. They simply could not imagine anyone being stubborn enough to keep fighting against impossible odds. Haven Station turned out to be a massive collection of ships and platforms that had been welded together into a floating city. It looked like organized chaos, with vessels from dozens of different species docked wherever they could find space. The Korathi who ran the station were small green aliens who seemed to be constantly in motion as they managed the endless flow of trade and information. Jake met with the station commander in a crowded bar, filled with smoke from alien tobacco and the sound of a dozen different languages being spoken at once. The commander was an old Korathi named Hexic, who had been running Haven Station for over 50 years. "So you are the human who embarrassed Commander Vexstar by escaping from his prison," Hexic said with what Jake thought might be a smile. "The story has already spread to every system within 20 light years. The mighty Zephyrians are offering a reward of 1 million credits for your capture." Jake tried not to show how nervous that made him. 1 million credits was enough money to buy a small fleet of ships. Every bounty hunter and mercenary in the galaxy would be looking for him now. "I am more interested in finding people who want to fight back against the Empire," Jake said. "There have to be others who are tired of living under Zephyrian rule." Hexic studied Jake for a long moment before nodding slowly. "There are some people you should meet. But first you need to understand something important. The resistance groups in this sector have been trying to fight the Empire for decades. They have lost more battles than anyone can count, and most of their leaders are dead or captured." That night, Hexic introduced Jake to representatives from 6 different resistance groups. They were all aliens from species that had been conquered by the Zephyrians years or decades ago. Some had been fighting for so long that they barely remembered what freedom looked like. The resistance leaders were suspicious of Jake at first. Humans were completely unknown in this part of the galaxy, and some of them wondered if Jake might be a Zephyrian spy in disguise. But when they heard the details of his escape and saw the freed prisoners he had brought with him, their attitudes began to change. "No one has ever freed prisoners from a Zephyrian facility before," said Kretha, who was a former Zephyrian scientist that had defected to the Resistance. "The security systems are considered impossible to overcome." "How did you manage it?" Jake spent hours explaining the tactics his crew had used and the weaknesses they had discovered in Zephyrian technology. The alien resistance leaders listened, with growing excitement as they realized that humans might think about warfare in completely different ways than they did. Most species try to match Zephyrian technology with their own advanced weapons, Jake explained. But we used simple tools and took advantage of their overconfidence. They never expected prisoners to fight back because in their experience no one ever does. Amy Collins had been working with the station's computer systems and discovered something that made everyone stop and think. The Zephyrian Empire was not as strong as it appeared to be. Their military was spread thin across hundreds of star systems, and they relied heavily on their reputation to keep conquered species in line. If enough species started fighting back at the same time, the Empire would have trouble responding to all the threats, Amy reported. They have the technology to crush any single rebellion, but they do not have enough ships to fight everywhere at once. Lisa Bennett had been monitoring Zephyrian communications and discovered that Commander Vexstar was under pressure from his superiors to recapture Jake quickly. The escape had been a huge embarrassment for the Empire, and they could not allow it to inspire others to rebel. They are sending hunter squadrons to search every system in this region, Lisa warned. We need to keep moving or they will find us eventually. Jake looked around the room at the faces of aliens who had been fighting a losing war for most of their lives. For the first time in years they looked hopeful. The impossible escape from the Zephyrian prison had proved that the Empire could be beaten. If someone was clever enough to find their weaknesses, then we better make sure we give them something. Worth finding, Jake said with a grin that made several of the aliens step back in surprise. They were beginning to realize that humans might be the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever seen. Jake Morrison stood in the command center of a hidden asteroid base watching reports come in from resistance operations across 12 different star systems. In the 6 months since his escape from the Zephyrian prison facility, the rebellion had grown from a few desperate groups into a real threat to the Empire. Species that had given up hope decades ago were now launching coordinated attacks against Zephyrian installations. The key to their success was something that Jake had learned during his time as a military officer on Earth. Most alien species had evolved in stable environments where they developed highly specialized societies that were very good at doing specific things. Humans were different because Earth had always been a dangerous and changing world that forced them to adapt quickly to survive. Dr. Patricia Hayes had joined the resistance after her research station was attacked by Zephyrian raiders. She was a xenopsychologist who studied how different alien minds worked, and she had some interesting theories about why humans were so effective at this kind of warfare. The Zephyrians evolved on a world with very little change or conflict, Patricia explained to Jake and his senior staff during one of their planning meetings. Their society is based on rigid hierarchies and following orders without question. They simply cannot understand how humans think because our brains work in completely different ways. Jake had seen this difference in action during their recent operations. When Zephyrian commanders encountered unexpected situations, they often froze up or made predictable responses based on their training. Human fighters like Danny Rodriguez and Amy Collins could change tactics in the middle of a battle and come up with solutions that no alien had ever thought of before. The resistance was now using modified Zephyrian equipment that had been captured during raids or built from salvaged parts. Bobby Chun had become a master at turning mining tools and industrial equipment into effective weapons. His latest creation was a device that could overload Zephyrian shields by feeding them too much energy at specific frequencies. Nicole Parker had taught herself to pilot captured Zephyrian fighters and had discovered that human reflexes and spatial reasoning gave her huge advantages in combat. She could perform maneuvers that Zephyrian pilots considered impossible and often won battles against ships that were technically superior to her own. The thing about Zephyrian technology is that it is designed for users who follow standard procedures, Nicole explained after returning from a successful raid on a supply convoy. They never expect someone to use their own ships against them in ways they were not designed for. Jake's reputation was spreading throughout the galaxy much faster than he had expected. The Zephyrian Empire controlled most of the communication networks, but they could not stop stories from traveling between star systems carried by traders and refugees. Every successful resistance operation inspired more species to join the fight. Commander Vexstar had become obsessed with capturing Jake, and had made several tactical mistakes because of his personal hatred for the human who had embarrassed him. Intelligence reports suggested that Vexstar was ignoring other threats to focus all his attention on hunting down the resistance leadership. Vexstar is thinking like a Zephyrian, Kretha observed during one of their strategy sessions. He believes that if he can capture or kill the leader, then the entire resistance will collapse. He does not understand that humans have taught us to think differently about how rebellions work. Jake had been studying Zephyrian military doctrine and had discovered that their entire strategy was based on overwhelming force and quick decisive victories. They had never had to deal with an enemy that used guerrilla tactics and refused to fight conventional battles. Every time Zephyrian forces prepared for a major confrontation, the resistance would scatter and attack somewhere else entirely. The rebellion was also benefiting from human knowledge of military history and tactics from Earth. Jake had introduced concepts like cell structure organization that made it almost impossible for the Zephyrians to destroy the entire resistance even if they captured some of the groups. Each cell operated independently and could continue fighting even if contact with the main leadership was lost. Tony Martinez had become the Resistance's primary communications coordinator and had developed a network that could pass information between star systems without using channels that the Zephyrians could monitor. His system was based on human cryptography techniques that were completely unknown to alien intelligence services. Kate Sullivan was serving as the chief tactical analyst and had identified patterns in Zephyrian behavior that allowed the Resistance to predict where the Empire would strike next. She had discovered that Zephyrian commanders always followed the same basic strategies because they were trained to believe that their methods were superior to anything other species could develop. The most successful resistance operation so far had been a coordinated attack on 3 Zephyrian mining facilities that were stripping rare minerals from conquered worlds. The attacks had been planned by Jake, but executed by alien fighters who used human tactics, adapted to their own species' abilities. The beauty of human military thinking is that it can be modified to work for anyone, Jake explained to a group of new resistance recruits from 4 different species. You do not have to become human to use human strategies. You just have to be willing to think about problems in new ways. The Zephyrian response to these attacks had been typically heavy-handed and predictable. They had increased security at all their facilities and started conducting massive sweeps of suspected resistance strongholds. But this had only made them more unpopular with civilian populations and had driven more species to join the rebellion. Jake received reports that uprisings were starting on worlds that had been under Zephyrian control for centuries. Species that had never fought back before were now using human-inspired tactics to attack their occupiers. The Empire was being forced to spread their military forces thinner and thinner as they tried to maintain control over their vast territory. Dr. Maria Santos had joined the Resistance as a technology specialist and had been working on ways to turn captured Zephyrian equipment into more effective weapons. Her latest project involved modifying their communication devices to broadcast on frequencies that could reach every inhabited world in a star system simultaneously. If we can get our message out to enough people at the same time, we might be able to coordinate planet-wide uprisings, Maria explained. The Zephyrians rely on preventing communication between resistance groups, but human technology might give us ways around their jamming systems. Ellen Wright had been leading supply runs to resistance cells throughout the sector and had reported that morale was higher than anyone had seen in decades. Species that had been resigned to permanent slavery were now talking about the possibility of actually defeating the Zephyrian Empire. They are calling Jake Morrison the human who showed the galaxy how to fight, Ellen told the command staff during a briefing. Some species have started using his name as a battle cry when they attack Zephyrian positions. Jake felt the weight of responsibility that came with being a symbol of hope for billions of oppressed beings throughout the galaxy. But he also knew that the real victory would not come from his reputation, but from teaching other species that they had the power to free themselves. The next phase of their plan would be the most dangerous yet, but Jake believed they were ready for it. Jake Morrison crouched in the maintenance tunnels beneath the Zephyrian capital city, watching the religious ceremony taking place in the great plaza above through a small viewing device. Millions of Zephyrians had gathered to celebrate the convergence, which happened only once every 7 years and was the most important event in their culture. It was also the perfect opportunity to broadcast a message that would reach every conquered world in the Empire. Simultaneously, the plan had taken months to develop and required precise timing that would have been impossible without the human ability to adapt quickly when things went wrong. Steve Johnson had spent weeks studying the city's infrastructure and had found a route through the industrial waste systems that would allow them to reach the main communication hub without being detected by security scanners. Carol Davis had infiltrated the city weeks earlier, posing as a worker from one of the outer colonies. Her job was to disable key security systems at exactly the right moment to give Jake's team access to the broadcasting equipment. She had proven to be naturally gifted at the kind of deception and misdirection that humans excelled at, but most alien species found difficult to master. The resistance had grown far beyond what Jake had imagined possible when he first escaped from the Zephyrian prison. Coordinated uprisings were happening on dozens of worlds, and the Empire was struggling to maintain control over their vast territory. But Jake knew that words could be just as powerful as weapons if they reached the right people at the right time. Dr. Maria Santos had modified a portable broadcasting device to interface with Zephyrian technology in ways that their engineers had never anticipated. The device could hijack their planetary communication network and override all other signals for approximately 10 minutes before their security systems could shut it down. 10 minutes is not very long to change the course of galactic history. Maria had warned Jake before the mission began, "You will need to make every word count because this will probably be our only chance to reach this many people at once." Jake carried the broadcasting device through narrow tunnels filled with pipes and cables that distributed power and information throughout the capital city. The tunnels were not designed for human-sized beings, and he had to crawl on his hands and knees for long stretches while trying not to make any noise that might alert the automated monitoring systems, the team with him included. Danny Rodriguez, who had become an expert at dealing with alien technology under pressure, and Lisa Bennett, who could hack into most computer systems given enough time and the right equipment. They had trained for this mission for weeks, but everyone knew that no plan survived contact with reality unchanged. "We are approaching the main junction," Danny whispered over their comm system. "I can see the access port to the communication hub from here." It looks like Carol was successful in disabling the security sensors in this section. Jake felt a mixture of excitement and fear as they reached the point where their careful planning would either succeed or fail completely. If they were discovered now, there would be no escape and no second chances. The Zephyrians would make sure that Jake Morrison became an example of what happened to anyone who dared to challenge the Empire. Lisa connected her equipment to the Zephyrian computer network and began the delicate process of gaining access to their communication systems without triggering any alarms. Human understanding of computer logic was different from alien programming, and often allowed them to find vulnerabilities that other species missed completely. "I am in their system," Lisa reported after several tense minutes. "But they have security protocols that I have never seen before. Give me a few more minutes to figure out how to bypass them without setting off every alarm in the city." Above them, the religious ceremony was reaching its climax as the Zephyrian High Priest began the ritual that would supposedly bring good fortune to the Empire for the next 7 years. Jake could hear the sound of millions of voices chanting in unison and knew that similar ceremonies were taking place on every Zephyrian world throughout the galaxy. "Got it," Lisa said with satisfaction. "The network is wide open and ready to broadcast." You have your 10 minutes starting now? Jake activated the broadcasting device and spoke into it with the calm confidence that had made him a natural leader during the darkest moments of their rebellion. He knew that his words would be heard by billions of enslaved beings across hundreds of star systems, and that this might be their only chance to coordinate a galaxy-wide uprising. My name is Jake Morrison, and I am speaking to everyone who dreams of freedom from Zephyrian oppression. 6 months ago, my crew and I were captured by the Empire and imprisoned on their homeworld. We were told that we would spend the rest of our lives as slaves serving our alien masters. Jake paused for a moment to let his words sink in before continuing. He could imagine the shock on Zephyrian faces as they realized their most sacred ceremony was being interrupted by the human who had become a symbol of resistance throughout their empire. But we escaped because we refused to accept that anything was impossible. We freed over 200 prisoners and proved that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could be beaten by anyone with enough courage and determination to fight back. Since then, resistance groups across the galaxy have won victory after victory using tactics that the Empire cannot understand or counter. Security alarms began sounding throughout the city as Zephyrian technicians discovered the unauthorized broadcast. Jake knew they only had a few more minutes before the signal would be cut off, but he was determined to make those minutes count. The Zephyrians want you to believe that their technology makes them invincible, but that is a lie. They are powerful only because they have convinced you that resistance is hopeless. Every species in this galaxy has abilities and knowledge that the Empire fears. You do not need to be human to think like a human and refuse to stay defeated. Danny was monitoring the security systems and reported that Zephyrian forces were closing in on their location. They would need to evacuate within the next few minutes or risk being trapped in the tunnels with no way out. The Empire rules through fear, but fear only works if you let it control your actions. Every world that rises up makes the next uprising easier because the Zephyrians cannot be everywhere at once. They may have better weapons, but we have something they will never understand, which is the refusal to accept that anything is impossible. Jake could hear the sound of Zephyrian security forces entering the tunnel system and knew that their escape route would soon be cut off. But he had one more thing to say that might inspire species across the galaxy to join the fight for freedom. Rise up now while their attention is divided. Rise up together and show the galaxy that no empire built on slavery and oppression can stand against people who refuse to surrender their dreams of freedom. They may defeat some of us, but they cannot defeat all of us if we fight as one. The broadcast signal suddenly cut off as Zephyrian technicians finally managed to shut down the hijacked network. Jake and his team began their desperate escape through the waste tunnels, while behind them the sound of pursuit grew louder with every passing minute. But across the galaxy, on hundreds of conquered worlds, beings who had lived without hope for decades suddenly believed that freedom might be possible after all. The message had been heard, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the captured Zephyrian flagship, watching the largest space battle in galactic history unfold around him. The Empire had finally assembled their entire remaining fleet for one massive attack designed to crush the rebellion once and for all. Over 3,000 Zephyrian warships faced the combined forces of 47 different species that had joined the fight for freedom. The odds were still heavily against the rebels despite everything they had accomplished over the past year. The Zephyrian ships were larger and more heavily armed than anything the Resistance could field. But Jake had learned that superior technology meant nothing if the people using it could not adapt when their standard tactics failed. Alex Turner flew his converted fighter through a formation of enemy battleships, using maneuvers that defied every rule of space combat that the Zephyrians understood. He had discovered that their ships were designed for long-range battles between opposing fleets, and were vulnerable to fast-moving targets that could get inside their defensive perimeter. Their targeting systems cannot track us when we fly this. Close to their hulls, Alex reported over the COM system as he fired at the main reactor of a Zephyrian cruiser. They never expected anyone to be crazy enough to use suicide tactics against ships this size. But the human tactics were not really suicide missions because they were based on careful study of Zephyrian technology and psychology. Ryan Cooper had figured out that their shield systems could be overloaded by feeding them specific energy frequencies in precise patterns. The aliens had never encountered this weakness because no other species had thought to use their own shields against them. All fighters concentrate on the command ship, Jake ordered as he watched the massive vessel that carried Commander Vexstar move toward the center of the battle. Use the feedback pulse technique to bring down their shields, then target their communication arrays. If we can blind their fleet coordination, the smaller ships will not know how to respond. The Resistance fleet was made up of captured Zephyrian vessels that had been modified by alien engineers working with human advisors. The combination of advanced alien technology with human tactical thinking had created weapons that the Empire had no defense against because they had never imagined such things were possible. Nicole Parker led a squadron of bombers in an attack on the main Zephyrian supply ships that were hanging back behind the battle lines. The Empire always kept their logistics vessels safe in the rear because they assumed that enemy forces would focus on destroying warships instead of support craft. Take out their fuel and ammunition supplies, Nicole called to her pilots as they dove toward the undefended transports. These ships need constant resupply to maintain their energy weapons and shields. Cut off their resources and they become sitting targets. Jake had spent months studying every major space battle in recorded galactic history and had noticed that most alien species fought in predictable patterns based on their cultural values and biological limitations. The Zephyrians always used the same basic strategy of overwhelming force applied in straightforward attacks because they believed that their technology made clever tactics unnecessary, but humans had evolved as persistence hunters who succeeded by exhausting their prey through long chases and unpredictable attacks from multiple directions. Jake was using the same basic approach on a galactic scale by forcing the Zephyrian fleet to respond to threats from every possible angle simultaneously. Their formation is starting to break up, reported Amy Collins, who was monitoring enemy communications from the Resistance command ship. Zephyrian captains are requesting new orders, but their commanders cannot decide how to respond to attacks that do not match any of their tactical databases. The battle had been raging for hours, and Jake could see that the human-inspired tactics were working exactly as he had hoped. The Zephyrian ships were powerful, but they were designed to fight enemies that used conventional strategies. When faced with opponents who refused to follow the rules of warfare, they had no idea how to adapt. Commander Vexstar finally made the mistake that Jake had been waiting for. Frustrated by his inability to counter the Resistance tactics, Vexstar ordered his entire fleet to concentrate their fire on Jake's flagship in an attempt to end the battle by killing the rebel leader. All ships converge on the human vessel, came Vexstar's voice over the captured communication channels. Destroy Jake Morrison and this rebellion will collapse like all the others before it. But Vexstar was thinking like a Zephyrian who believed that rebellions always depended on a single strong leader. He did not understand that humans had taught the Resistance to operate as a network, where every captain could make independent decisions based on the changing situation. Execute Plan Omega, Jake broadcast to the entire Resistance fleet. All ships scatter and implement random attack patterns. Do not try to protect my vessel. Focus on completing the mission. The Plan Omega was something that Jake had developed based on human understanding of swarm, intelligence, and distributed decision-making. Instead of trying to coordinate thousands of ships from a central command, each vessel would act independently, while following simple rules that would create effective group behavior. Danny Rodriguez had modified their flagship's engines to produce a massive energy surge that would overload every Zephyrian ship within a certain range. The modification would probably destroy their own vessel, but it would also cripple the core of the enemy fleet and give the Resistance forces a chance to win the battle. Initiating feedback cascade in 30 seconds, Danny announced over the ship's comm system. All crew members get to the escape pods immediately. This is going to be one hell of an explosion. Jake remained on the bridge with a skeleton crew to guide the ship toward the center of the Zephyrian formation. He could see Vextar's massive command vessel, growing larger on the main screen as they approached on what appeared to be a collision course. "You fought well, human," came Vextar's voice over the communication channel as he realized what Jake was planning to do. "But this changes nothing. The Empire has ruled for thousands of years and will continue to rule long after you are dead." Jake smiled as he prepared to activate the feedback cascade that would end both their lives, but would also mark the beginning of the end for the Zephyrian Empire. He had never expected to survive this war, but he had succeeded in proving that no oppressor was invincible if enough people were willing to fight back. "The Empire ends today," Jake replied as he initiated the energy cascade, "because you never understood that killing one human just makes the rest of us more determined to win." The explosion that destroyed both flagships also knocked out the shields and weapons of every Zephyrian vessel within 50 kilometers. The Resistance fleet immediately pressed their attack, and within hours, the most powerful military force in galactic history had been completely defeated. Jake Morrison died in the battle, but his legend lived on as species across the galaxy finally threw off the chains of Zephyrian oppression. The human who had refused to accept that anything was impossible had taught the entire galaxy that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and that no empire built on fear could stand against people who refused to surrender their dreams. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, they would mark the day that Jake Morrison became a galactic legend as the moment when the galaxy learned that humans were the most dangerous species it had ever seen, not because of their weapons or technology, but because of their absolute refusal to accept defeat.